Hello, welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Fatchett. Normally, I put these funny little frames around each of the episodes, but for this episode, I'm not doing that. I want you to know that I take this topic very seriously, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm making light of it. There's a time for humor, and it's not on this particular episode. And we'll get back to humor. But for this episode, I'm engaging in an open, frank conversation with my friend and photographer, Leighton DaCosta, where we discuss race, bias, discrimination, and how they pertain to the photography industry. I also want to take this moment before we get started to extend an invitation to any Black photographer or photographers of color, any LGBTQ plus photographers. You're welcome on this podcast. Please reach out if you'd like to come on and to discuss a topic that is important to you. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Leighton DaCosta. Hello, and welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. I am your host, Casey Fatchett. I have with me today my friend, Leighton DaCosta. Leighton, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Today we're going to talk about something that's been on my mind for the last month or so, or whatever it's been. It's hard to tell time anymore during the pandemic. But it's race in photography. And I reached out to Leighton because I wanted to have an open and frank discussion. And my thoughts on that were because the more often we have these types of open discussions, the less people can sort of casually ignore the experiences of Black people and people of color, especially in the photography industry. Before we get started, I just wanted to because I really want to listen to what you have to say and hear it, and just to kind of set the table for that, there's just a couple of things that I've noticed lately. I've noticed, first of all, a lot more white photographers sort of just like casually feeling it's okay to say casually racist things. And I went from kind of being of the mindset of thinking that, yes, I know it's there. I think it's not a small percentage, but it's not a big percentage. And now I'm starting to feel like it's a much bigger percentage than I thought it was. And the second thing that really struck me recently was seeing a photographer named Andre Roberts, I believe, from Brooklyn. He's a Black photographer. He's a street photographer. And he did this essay on what it's like being a Black photographer, a video essay on CBS News. And he was talking about how he was at the protest with his camera and a cop thought his camera was a gun. And I immediately thought to myself that is something that I have never had to worry about as a white man. And just finding a lot of places in my own life and trying to be introspective and thinking about where I've not only benefited, but where I didn't have to worry, if that makes sense. And so I just kind of wanted, like, with that, is sort of like setting the table is like where I was coming from. I'd kind of like to hear what you have to say and see where this conversation goes.
Well, I'll start with the second part, actually, with as far as whether or not your camera is being used as a gun or in the environment. So one of the things that I will say is that in my experience, like I've been, around the industry since probably 2003, and then I first started shooting like around 92 in high school. When I was in high school, I didn't notice half as much stuff as I did as an adult professional. And so when I was in Charleston, my first thing is that I always look for what permits do I need. I pull my permits or whatnot. And we were doing a shoot on the beach over there in Folly Beach, and we were getting so much hassles because most of the photographers, even though that the rules said that you have to have a permit, never ever pull a permit. And so
it's the same in New York.
and what the irony was, so here I am, got this model who we flew in from Miami, me and another photographer, we're out there, we're on the beach and we're starting to practice, but I have everything, I have my papers and everything. I literally had somebody, I don't know if he was a park ranger, didn't identify himself, come in a canoe, past a group of guys that were sitting on the beach as well with glass bottle container beers, drinking, past them to come to us as, hey, do you have a permit to be shooting out here? And, thanks to social media where we have these groups, I went into one of our groups and said, hey, have any of you ever been approached about having a permit? And there have been guys in there that have been shooting for 20 years, have never had an issue with any of them coming approaching them about shooting no permit, with the exception if you're shooting at like Sullivan's Island where you can't do that anyway. But outside of that, never had any kind of issues. And so what I've always noticed and what I've always told young photographers, especially young Black photographers, is that not only do you have to do what you're supposed to do, like things that like i.e. pull permits, things that are for what professionals are supposed to do. Somebody's paying you, you do everything legally so that way that you don't face the embarrassment of being kicked out of a park or being kicked out from a beach. But you also have to look the part as well, because someone looking at you, directly, hey, you have a camera on you with a 70 to 200 lens, and they think that you have an AR-15.
Right.
The only difference is just because of your presence there. And I'm not going to say your skin color, I'm just going to say your presence there and how they interpret your presence. So,
and that's, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say that sort of notion, and that's something that, I've noticed, more and more in the last, I guess, 5 to 10 years, that Black photographers, and photographers of color, like, have to be more than perfect in the way they do things. And it's not just photographers, it's just in general.
In general, and there are there are a lot of I think work ethic myths that are out there. I just finished reading a book called The Color of Law, which opened my eyes up to a lot of things that I took for granted myself. Just being able to go buy a house whenever I want to, get a 2.5% loan or whatnot. Whereas not even 50 years ago, a lot of Blacks couldn't even get loans where they built equity in the house. Right. They would have to pay off the entire loan before they would realize any kind of equity. And so, and this was law. This wasn't something like, oh, you just got hosed. This is law. Right. I think, and this is one of those. I think that we need to me as a Black photographer who's originally from Jamaica, I grew up in Florida and Brooklyn. I've seen a lot of different, ethnic groups who have been the low man on the totem pole and worked their way up, so to speak. When we look at it and we talk about privilege, and I think that people think privilege has to do with money and access to money, and that's not always the case. I had to remind somebody the other day. I said, dude, you're 64, 65 years old. In your lifetime, there have been Black and white water fountains. And no matter how much money you had as a Black man, you could not drink at that white water fountain.
Nope.
And this has been in your lifetime. That is the essence of privilege. And so when we come to the photography realm, is that, when I was coming through, especially digital, what the privilege was with how big was your lens? How big was your camera? The bigger the lens, the bigger the camera. The more professional that you were. I remember Missy Wax said, she had the little skit that said, if you're good with the lens, you drive a Benz. You had to you had to look the part. Well, we're away from that now, where I think it's now just straight stereotypes. the worst compliment that I've ever gotten in my life. You don't shoot like a black photographer,
Ugh.
right? And the
What does
person,
that
like I
even
said,
mean? What
but it was a
does that even
compliment. Their
mean?
thing was like, "Hey, I see all these black photographers, and they're shooting like the Source magazine type thing and whatnot." And I'm sitting there like, "Man, I would love to get on the Source magazine, right? I just like want to get on any magazine, right?"
I want to get
And
paid.
and they are, but people would say this as if it was a compliment and not understand that it was a straight insult. That the color of your skin determines how you shoot. It's as opposed to any other kind of aesthetic. That's like me saying that, hey man, Casey shoots some really good work. You don't shoot like a Canon photographer.
Oh, you know,
Yeah,
I don't care so much about the camera.
exactly.
I think that's and that what you're saying actually like, brings another point to me. Like what I was going through and like looking. I have always collected like quotes about everything, like just like things that I see it. I write it down or I put it in something. It's a lot easier in the digital age to do it than when I was a kid. And, but I was looking for quotes from black photographers and just trying to like find some things. And like I had I had to dig so much. Like there's some stuff out there by Gordon Parks, that was like readily available, or Eli Reed. There was just like a few here and there, but there's like, you always see those things of like 50 quotes about photography, whatever that
Right.
are everywhere. And there's usually like maybe one there, like one Eli Reed one or one Gordon Parks there. And I found all of these and like that were so brilliant, but it's the sort of like they're just kind of felt like they were ignored because they're like that's not what you look for from black photographers.
Well,
Just
it's like like nobody's gonna ever talk about like James Ball or Carrie Weems or whatnot. They're gonna talk about Gordon Parks, and Gordon Parks is great. But you know who Gordon Parks? When I hear photographers mention Gordon Parks, what comes to mind? Rocky
Monetta Sleep.
Marciano. Rocky Marciano. That's day one. Rocky Marciano. That's what comes to mind because it seems like that's all everybody knows.
Right.
And
Yeah.
in the U.S. and I mean like, and the reason why I know of James Ball because my favorite American, right, is Frederick Douglass, and not even for his abolitionist views, but for his photography views. Right? And I challenge people to actually study Douglass and how he felt about photography and how the photography was about the subject and how you portrayed the subject, not about the artist or the person who was actually capturing the subject.
Right.
So, those are one of those things. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted.
No, it's fine. It's, I mean, yeah. And like I said, like there's usually like one Gordon Parks quote in like every one of those, but like, that's it. Like, Carrie Weems, there's like, I found these quotes from her. It was like, art is the place we all go to seek solace. And I was just like, why is that not more widely known? And there's this quote from Monetta Sleep Jr., who was a photojournalist who like covered Martin Luther King and like was like the family photographer basically during like the height of the civil rights movement. And I found this quote from him that's about photojournalism, and I was just like, this totally captures like the thought process for a photographer. And he's like, you have to get comfortable with your camera. You have to get comfortable enough with this, like be just like, let the situation be happening and just know your stuff and like wait for that moment. Like that special, just be confident that that moment is going to come and not try to force it. I was just like, this is an amazing quote. Like, why have I never heard this before? And I'm only finding it after like specifically like reading an interview with him.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm like I had to go through like dig through archives and find this. I'm like, it's a brilliant quote about photojournalism and photography in general, and it's impossible to find.
So one of my and like I'm gonna shoot my shot because you miss 100% of the shots that you never take, right? So I usually don't like really name drop too many people, but I will. Mm-hmm. So there's a Miami photographer, Jeffrey Salter, right? If you ever any of you guys ever follow him, the one thing that impressed me about Jeffrey is that his style is so like, I don't want to say it's so Miami, but it's so authentically raw. And even when he does his commercial work, like what's the soccer player Mario? I can't remember his last name, but he did a shot of him for Sports Illustrated where it was like a Jesus pose walking on water or whatever, and the impact of it was just so amazing. And so one of the things that why I love Jeffrey's work is that I believe he classifies himself as an editorial commercial lifestyle photographer. He is not a sports photographer, but I think he is. I know he's double digits, but I think he might be triple digits Sports Illustrated covers, right? So he's not a sports photographer, but he covers sports magazines. And I was always so like his method. You always see him laying on the ground, but the things that he does, his angle, his perspective, and it's not to be over the top. It's just to capture the essence. Things that I love when I even going to Gregory Heisler, which like half the photographers out there nowadays don't even like Gregory who. We know guys like Annie Leibovitz did a shoot that everybody. I'm going to think of is it Simone Biles or that?
Yes, the recent one, like the gold.
That everybody gave Annie flack because the way that she was lit, the color cast, and all this stuff. And I've seen Annie do amazing work with dark skin as well. And who I blame, because I thought that the cover work was not the best representation of both Annie Biles or both, right? So who I blame was the copy editor, the person who actually approved that image to be on the cover.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's who really has a say. And for somebody like Annie, who, as a woman, in the 70s and whatnot, yeah, you got everybody talking about negotiated Rolling Stones and this and stuff, but to work your way up in a majority, it's like golf, a majority old white man industry. That and it's surprising when people don't realize. I think that still like 80% of the industry is still men, right? And
probably somewhere.
And now that we're going out of the film days, the barrier to entry is a lot lower to get in. But there was so much threat and there was so much ego there that you have to compete with. And now that where we're at now, there are tons of photographers out there now that are doing amazing work, that are always doing amazing work. But their work is now being showcased. In 2020, if you Google top Black photographers in 2020, you may come across maybe 30 or 40 or 50 blogs, if not more.
Right.
Google top Black photographers in 2000.
Yeah.
And see what you get, or 2005 or 2010. And go ahead.
And part of that, like, I think it's great. It's like we're amplifying and getting that out there. And my concern, and tell me what you think about this, is that I've discovered new people to follow now, but also people from the past whose work I find inspirational or just like powerful or whatever. But I fear that there's just sort of like, here's my list of 10 Black photographers to follow. I followed them. That's all I've got to do. I did my good deed.
Right.
And like that sort of like falls, short of the goal.
So I think where we're at now, and here we are, and hopefully I don't date this too much, but here we are in midsummer of 2020, right? if we don't fall off the cliff by the end of the year.
It's the COVID times.
It's not so much. It's about moving forward. So, and I tell guys this: not everything is racist. First of all, some things are a legacy bigotry. Some things are systemically designed to exclude, or systemic racism or not. When I used to fly in the Navy, one of the big things that they said that was a quote unquote racist type thing was that we were required to swim a mile as a pilot. And that blacks normally didn't swim. And I'm like, I don't know, I swim. And then I knew a lot of white guys that did it, right? And I didn't know that, but I came from an island. So it's like everybody swam. Like we have to find ways to move forward to where it becomes normal to see people in certain places. Right. And I think, and even with our work, and like, there's nothing wrong with having, cultural work. Like I said, down south, people are more bigots than they are quote unquote true racism, which means that they hate everything that you do just because you did it. But
right.
Whereas in like when in New York, I always tell people like in New York, Massachusetts, whatnot, in my experience, you have white folks who hate other white folks because they're not the same kind of white. You have Irish and Germans that hate Italians and Dutch and whatever, right? But yet we all still get along, right? And this is the biggest melting pot in the world. And when I say moving forward, I think what ends up happening is that when you do hear certain comments, and I see this now more than I did maybe 5 years ago, somebody says something off color that is just totally stupid, like, hey, you don't shoot like a black photographer. And then somebody else checks them, like what does that mean, man? Before your friends didn't check you. One of the things I used to tell my guys is like, people always just say in the military you don't usually have this issue for whatever reason, and the military is just a segment of society. But you'll hear, well, I have black friends, right? I've had black guys over my house and stuff like that. And then I asked the question, I was like, well, how many black guys have you gone to their house? And the conversation changes.
Yeah.
Because it's like, for my best friend, my two best friends growing up, my best men were Bacardi and Cola, right? That, I've been to both of their houses, they've been to both my house. They've both been to my house. And it's just like, it's normal because your friends come over and hang out. And that's, I think, where we're at now in a society is that because you're talking about such a low demographic, unless you live in a big city or live in the South, that people look at it as it's not my problem. And when it becomes their problem is that when you're in a place like Cookeville, Tennessee, which is like in the middle of nowhere, and you haven't been around any black people your entire life, but your grandkid is black, then it becomes your problem because now you're worried about your grandchild.
Right.
Living in the world that you have helped build. And, as we move forward in the future, in that down south, you see we're going through this thing right now about statues being torn down and whatnot. And I tell people this, nothing changes the past except the truth. So when we talk about revisionist history, are we reimagining it? Did Michael Jordan not score 63 points that game? Or, or is it like every game that Michael Jordan has scored over 60 points, he's lost? You know what I mean?
Right.
How do we want to say that? But at the end of the day, it was still done that way. Those games are still played. People still died.
It still happened. It still happened.
So how do we move forward? And I think that's where a lot of photographers are losing, or they're off the bus right now. I think a lot of these photographers are off the bus. They need to get on the bus because the bus is moving. A lot of these companies, they think you're pandering and stuff like that. A lot of these companies have waited for an opportunity. Sony is the first company to jump out and say, hey, we see an opportunity. It might be business. It might be marketing.
But it's still an opportunity.
But it's an opportunity, and it was a business marketing. I'm going to give a shout out to this one guy. And I'm not getting paid for this. I wish you would give me a sponsor if you listen to me. But Andy Funderburg, since I met him back in, I think, 2014 or 2013, I get him confused sometimes with Gary Owen because he's so down, right? And he is somebody that has been working with not just blacks and whites, but gays, people that are just all over in the industry, and opening up opportunities for the people. And so I think that is kind of one of those things where the pie is so huge, the pie is so big, the industry is. Now
There's plenty.
Gary Paul had said something about religion one time. It's like, hey, if you put religion on your website, half the people are going to love you, half the people are going to hate you. And you have to decide at one point, do you have enough business from the half that level? If that's not the case, maybe not put it on there. Michael Jordan, he was chastised for saying, "Hey, Republicans wear sneakers too," right? There is a business aspect to this as well as a social aspect. And what we need to figure out ways is that we can move forward and bring them all together to where it becomes normal and not.
But it's not. Yeah, and it's like you were talking about, like now it's becoming more normal for like people to check somebody when they say something, but it's also becoming, you were talking about like Funderburg and like Sony and people who've done good things. It's also becoming, clientele is calling people out. Like you're not just getting checked by your friends. A lot of people are getting checked by their clients, their customers, saying like, "Hey, what?" I mean, there's the business aspect of it, but we saw with like, shoot and share, things went downhill real fast when they just basically started like saying, "Oh, we're going to start like deleting comments from black photographers."
Yeah,
and,
I saw that.
we're not.
House of Flynn went through that. I think a lot of these little rock star groups, and this is hearsay on my side, so please don't sue me for any kind of slander or whatever. But I think where the challenge comes about is that they are also making a financial decision when they decide to delete these things or whatnot, because they don't want to upset the people who they know that are complacent with the status quo. Right. And it is a challenge that we're like, and this can kind of tie into the features that when you're actually talking about giving clients a value set, part of you being a human being is treating your clients like human beings and treating their friends like human beings. And I've had in Jacksonville, Florida, I had a bride looking to book me, and she kind of her face went from 10 to 2 when she saw a same-sex couple in my my sample guide. Right? She was like, "Are those two women?" I'm like, "Yes, they are." Right? She's like,
"Yep."
Well, I didn't know you shot that. I was like, "Is that going to be an issue with you?" And she was like, "Well, that's not my thing." I said, "You know what? I understand. I tell you what, if this is an issue for you now, I can refer you to a friend of mine who might be more fit for you, because I don't want to force you to work with me." And I think that was one of the things where, for her, she was surprised, because it's like, "Oh, you're going to turn down money?" And I'm like, at a certain point, it's not me turning down money. It's me making sure that, what, I know what I stand for, so that in the future, me working with you doesn't come back to haunt me, and then it costs me money.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, and I've done that many times over the years, especially with interracial weddings, with same-sex weddings. And like people, like I've had people make nasty comments on my Facebook page about something like that. I'm like, "Hey, I don't even know how you're even in any way connected to this, other than to just coming here and like spew vitriol at this wedding." But that's not what I'm about. And like people who've said like they wouldn't hire me because like, you do like same-sex weddings. Like I'm just like, I kindly, decline your wedding. Like I don't think people would understand that. Like you can turn down jobs, even though you want to get paid, you can turn that stuff down, because if you don't want to feel that way.
I still want to service them. That's why I'll always offer them an alternative. And, because to me, it's like, what, they're still going to leave a bad review. They're still going to say, "Hey, this person likes doing this," whatever, right? But, excuse me, at the end of the day, my job as a business person is to still serve you. And, if you're not forced to come into my establishment, I'm not forced to serve you in my establishment, but I don't want you, as a human being, I don't want you to go hungry, if that makes any sense. And
I understand what you're saying.
And I think that's kind of where customers and service providers, we have to start looking at, like I said, at how big this pie is, how big it can get, because there is somebody for everybody. And if you want to be a racist or a bigot or whatever, you know what? I'm in Dubai, and one of my guys is a third generation South African Indian out there. And one of the things, he had a client come to him big. I think it was like a $40,000 or $50,000 wedding, and he was like, the client literally said, "I don't want any effing Indians at my wedding." And so the thing about it is, now him as a business, he's like, he sent his non-Indian customers, right, or his non-Indian workers to go service the customer, right? But he's sitting there as an Indian himself. But the thing that is, the guy assumed that he was Arab because he was third generation out there, like he didn't come across. And I sit there and I'm like, we deal with this all the time in the industry, and I think that what gets photographers in trouble is when they try to service and hide, and then when they quote unquote, well, I didn't know it was a same-sex wedding.
Right.
If it mattered to you, right? Now we are in this thing where people, they hide behind the cake ruling and stuff like that. But I'm like, and I tell guys this: the only reason why you got caught up into that is because you marketed to something that's not what you do.
Right.
I don't shoot kids, even though I did shoot a kid the other day. Right? She should have ran faster. No.
No.
Too much Full Metal Jacket. Sorry.
You gotta lead them. You gotta lead them a little bit more.
Well, because like she's like, well, her mom was like, I need a headshot session, and I do headshot sessions for kids. But she's like, I need a headshot session, and oh, by the way, while we're doing this, can we do this? And I'm
that old chestnut.
Okay, I guess so. And what's so funny about it is she does that, and I mean these images are beautiful. They're great. I haven't blogged them because I don't want a lot of other people coming and say, "Hey, you shoot my kid too." Right?
Well, it's like, I mean, that's what my friend Spencer Alum always talks about. Like, he's like, he talks about it specifically from like the perspective of shooting weddings. He's like, if you don't like doing the portraits at weddings, don't post a bunch of portraits on your website. Like, you'll get less people who are concerned about like having fantastic, like posed portraits, like focus on like those, candid moments or whatever. He's like, but like whatever it is that you don't like doing, like don't show off that work.
Like, and for the record, if anybody's listening and you need a photographer in South Florida or South California that shoots same-sex weddings and same-sex couples and
call Leighton.
War, I'm your guy.
Call Leighton. Yeah, but I think like to kind of get back to like something we were talking about there with like just in the photography world and groups and how there's just sort of this casual, I don't know, ignoring of people of color. I think there was something I was thinking about the other day, and it was just like in representation in like things like just in contests, like the judges. Like I was thinking back at like, how I've won some photography awards. I've won some competitions, but then I was like looking back at stuff and go like, how in some of these there were like no photos of people of color. Like there's no black people. There's no Indian people. There's no like anybody other than white people. And I'm thinking that I look at the judges, and the judges are all white people. And I don't think that I'm not saying that it's racist or it's bigotry, but we have our implicit biases.
Right. It's not normal. Like for example, Keith Cephas was a judge last year at WPPI, and I've known him for about former Navy guy, but I've known him for about 15 years or so since I was in Virginia. And he was excited because I got him to actually submit to WPPI. And like I said, with the exception of like people like Lindsay Adler or something like that, I really, and this is a conversation I have with her about people who shoot dark skin. There is a phobia among some photographers about shooting people with dark skin, especially when they having like bright colors or whatever. I'm like to get the colors right or whatnot. And I'm sitting there like, if you can shoot a black and white tuxedo, you can somebody dark skin, And the challenge comes back to, like I said, moving forward, it's about, us noticing what's normal. I mean, and I will say that black photographers have a part to play in it too. We are becoming more, there are more seats at the table that are opening up, and we're sitting down, and I think that they are opening up more seats on top of that. Olympus did their brand ambassador. I forgot Memphis Educators or whatnot, and they had some faces of like minority faces on there, but they didn't have any black people on there. Nikon, with the exception of Matthew Jordan Smith, didn't have any black people on there for the longest. And barely any women for their ambassadors.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and Canada will have every once in a while. And I think what it is that when you know that it's based on popularity, and marketing and brand and stuff like that, that more than just the actual, hey, let's open up the demographic. I think that the business side, does shadow or mimic the social side. For the longest times, and this is in the digital area, photographers are very ego driven. Like
really?
Like Dunning Kruger takes effect like all day long. The worst thing you could ever do is, and that's why I always tell guys, if you're going to post a picture online for critique, do not ever post a picture of anybody that you love, right? Because it comes back. You know what I mean? So it's like trust me, we know, right? And so it comes back, right? And no matter what. And so what ends up happening is that you start taking things personal, or it comes across, and it's not that. So when you go to say, hey guys, you need to do a print competition, and they go to this print competition with this picture that they swear is going to be like a 90. It's going to score 95, right? And they get a 65 or 58. I've seen this before. And they don't understand why. But they're not sitting there understanding like, let me learn, come back next year, and let me bring 5 more prints. And what ends up happening is that when you start making it normal, when you start making it not to where the only black faces that are in a print competition just happen to be faces that you caught while you were doing a water relief in Africa or doing some kind of special mission type thing. That this is actually John and Sue next door and their kid. When you start doing that, and when I tell you that this world is changing, this is a tangent. Sorry about this.
No, that's right.
I'm on Facebook and I see a same-sex eHarmony couple ad on Facebook, and which is that like considering the background of eHarmony, 10, 15 years ago, where it is now. This lets us know that we are trying to move forward as a society. I think there's some people that feel that in order for them to move forward, they have to change who they are, instead of understanding that, hey, maybe the world is round. I'm not gonna fall off. So,
well, world is round. That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, what you're saying is like what I can't remember the exact thing, but the arc of history bends towards justice. But it's also like, are you going to stay in the past, or are you, can we hope, like you said earlier, moving forward? The whole point is moving forward. Like, are you coming with us, or are you staying back there? Like, are we going to have more diversity in representation, both in like competitions, brand ambassadors, teachers, just like having that diversity out there so that it becomes just more normal? Because like I saw some of this backlash. Sometimes people are like, when people are like, oh, we're posting, here's 10 black-owned businesses or black-owned wedding businesses or 10, black photographers you should follow on Instagram or whatever. And like, you look at, I made the mistake of looking in the comment section and, seeing people going like, what about white businesses? What about this? What about this? And like, there's the whataboutism. But it's like, like we're saying here is that if this representation just became more normal all around, it does, like, there's plenty to go around. We can just like it eventually, if we open this up and have more of everybody being represented, then you don't start asking those questions about like, what about my people? Because everybody's represented. I think the problem is you have the white people who are sitting there like holding on to like they may not even realize it. I don't know. There's some I think who probably do. It's like, oh, my privilege is disappearing. What I used to use to keep myself above other people is starting to disappear. And that's where they feel threatened, and they go like, oh, like, I'm not racist, but I'm losing my leg up, basically. And they feel threatened. And, hopefully, man, I really hope we're seeing the death throes of,
I think
some
we're
of
still
this.
years away from it, but but like for me, it's just like when I used to fly planes. They tell you don't chase needles because the needles are always in the path, right? So the biggest thing is that you look at what the trend of the needle is. It falling or is it climbing? And that's one of those things that I think right now in the industry, like in our society and in the industry, I think we're becoming more, not just diverse, but inclusive. And I explained, if any of you guys follow me on LinkedIn, that you know that I explained the difference and this is a fat kid terminology between diversity and inclusion. Diversity is when you get a dozen donuts and 3 of them are chocolate and 9 of them are glazed. That's diversity. But inclusion is when you get that 50 mixed bucket of munchkins and you just grab your hand in them and you don't care which one you're taking out because they're all going to do the same thing.
Because they're all good.
They all belong. And that's a big difference. So
yeah,
that is
definitely.
Sorry about
that's
that.
A good way to, no, that's a good way to explain it. I think that's a good place for us to sort of wrap up. And I know I normally do this thing called useless information on the podcast. I found something recently. This is the opposite end of the spectrum. It's very poignant information, especially given the current time period. The first murder caught on film happened in 1919 during the Chicago race riots. The guy who caught it was a Japanese photographer named Jun Fujita. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
No.
He's the guy who actually took the pictures of the St. Valentine's Day massacre.
Oh, wow.
He's got a bunch of like photos. He could get into places because he was neither white nor black. He could get in a lot of places, like, and sort of like move in and out. But he captured a group of white guys beating a black man to death with a brick on camera. And when the police showed up, he told them, I've got a picture of this. He didn't arrest anybody. He said, oh, if they were guilty, they would have run away when I showed up.
Oh, wow.
So even like the first time that someone had photographic evidence of this happening, the police ignored it. And in 101 years, I'm hoping that maybe we're finally starting to see some people, like other people, looking at the evidence and making changes.
Well, you mentioned earlier about the comment section, right? Like kind of comment section, I would say, well, like what were they doing before he got hit with the head, right? Before the picture was taken. Like I said, I think we're moving forward. I mean, like I said, compared to you go to some of the conventions, you see a lot more diversity in the conventions now than you did probably 15 years ago or 10 years ago. I think that the social media has made the world a lot smaller. I think, and this is one of the things, I think that there's not just amongst, black and white. I think that there is a lot smaller world, more acceptance, whatever you want to call it, with, gay photographers, gay people in the industry, whether it be women photographers that are in the industry now. I think that, there used to be this kind of, like I said, in 2005 to 2010, if you were a female photographer and you were a natural light shooter, right? You were looked down upon. You were cast out. And
you're a mom tog or whatever they would call them.
And I think now we're at a point to where it's like because like I tell people, we fight in photography over brand loyalty. We fight over cameras that are not paying us to actually say Canon or Nikon, you know. And we fight over this stuff. So like, it's going to be hard for a lot of people to change and shift. But just like how a lot of people left Canon and left Nikon to go to Sony, right? Hey, it happens, and it happens quicker than what most people expect. And you either move forward and you come out with like the R5 or the R6, whatever.
R5 and R6.
Or even like the Z5, which I looked at the other day. For the price point that is at, the Z5 is actually really good. The Nikon Z5. People like me are waiting for like the Z8 to decide how I'm moving forward. But and I think this is where we're at. I think we're at a point to where we are recording modern history, and we're recording good and bad. Like the protest and everything like that. Like there's a lot of things going on, but there's a lot of unity going. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, people, I hope they don't get culture fatigue from everything that changes. That was one of the biggest things that we worried about when gay marriage became legal, is that everybody expected like, oh no, now my granddaughter's going to be gay, right? It was like, that's not how it works. It's not contagious.
It's not how this happens.
And so I think that like, people who are worried that like, hey, just because, it's okay not to beat a black person up, right? That means that you're going to and I think that is one of the things that we're going to move forward to and be doing really, really well in our future.
I kind of as we're wrapping up, bring a physics note in here, because I studied physics. There's a thing called like overcoming friction, like move an object.
Right.
Like if you've got like a block of cement and you're trying to push it across something, like you have to apply enough forward momentum to overcome friction to get it moving.
Right.
And my hope is right now what we're doing is overcoming that friction, and eventually we're going to get like much more forward movement. Like that's the resistance we're feeling right now is that friction to get the block moving forward. I hope.
I hope so too.
Leighton, thank you for having this discussion with me. I hope to have you back again soon. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Thanks for listening, and thank you to Leighton DaCosta for coming on to talk to me. You can follow Leighton on Instagram at Leighton D Photo. That's LEIGHTON Photo. And please subscribe to the Nerdy Photographer podcast and leave us a review. It helps us a lot. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Nerdy Photo. That's at The Nerdy Photo. Until next time, stay safe and stay nerdy.